Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Welcome back, young friends, to another session of our Gradual Teaching series. We've been looking at the Buddha's gradual instructions on the heavenly realms, and in particular, we've been focusing a little bit about Kamma and rebirth. So today's session is really looking at the complexity of Kamma. So we want to expand a little bit our understanding of Kamma, but also to ensure that we understand that certain aspects of Kamma are actually in the domain of the Buddha's special knowledge. So the result of Kamma is one of these aspects. So sometimes we try and figure out, why is Kamma ripening in this way? And we try and make sweeping statements about, oh, it's because of this. That person did this in the past, and therefore this is what's happening to them now, like a direct relationship. But as we've seen, it's not so simple. Buddha talks about dark Kamma, dark and bright Kamma, and those sorts of things. So it's not so simple. And when we think about our bank account as our karmic bank account, we make deposits in the past that have been good actions and also bad actions, that through body, speech and mind we've made those deposits. And so not all of it has ripened in the past. We're still carrying forward a balance. And as we live this life, we're also depositing good and bad actions. And hopefully in this lifetime, we're purely attempting to deposit good actions in there. Now, in this sutta, the Achintaya Sutta, the Buddha talks about inconceivable matters. And of course, the result of Kamma is one of these four. So the four are the domain of the Buddhas, the second is the domain of one in mental absorption or jhanas, the third is this result of Kamma, and the fourth is speculation about the world. So when it comes to trying to conceive something on this list, the Buddha recommends not to do it. That if you try to conceive any of these four things, it has two results, either madness or frustration. So you either go nuts trying to figure it out, or you get extremely frustrated and then quite angry about it. So he encourages us to be cautious around it and to take his teachings in a wholesome way. So on that note, we'll go through the rest of this thing about the complexity of Kamma in order to help us understand, but just have this in the back of your mind as we go through it. If you remember from the talk or the session that we had on the Vatupama Sutta, we went through a number of suttas, one of which was this Ducharita Vipaka Sutta. And this looked at 8 kinds of bad and unwholesome actions and what kind of results that you can expect. So we looked at particularly the unwholesome bodily actions, the unwholesome verbal actions, and then also drinking alcohol. So that makes up the 8. So if you kill living beings, take what is not given, sexual misconduct, false speech, divisive speech, harsh speech, frivolous speech, and drink alcohol, the worst case scenario, if you repeatedly pursue, develop, and practice those unwholesome things, is that it is conducive to hell, the animal realm, and the hungry ghost realm. So Buddha is very clear about that. Then he also says in each of them, he says, if you're reborn as a human being, so if as a result of that complex formula based on your personal bank account for Kamma, as a minimum, it would lead to, in the case of killing living beings, you'd have a shorter lifespan. If you've taken what is not given, there would be a loss of wealth. Sexual misconduct, then you would have enmity and rivalry. False speech means you would be falsely accused. Divisive speech means that you'll be divided from, or you would have friendships break. Harsh speech would have the result of unappealing or disagreeable sounds. Frivolous speech would have the result of others distrusting your words. And then drinking alcohol, which we've seen before, we've talked about, it's mental derangement or madness. So these are the things that the Buddha indicates. Now it gives you an idea of what can happen, and it's meant to dissuade you, to discourage you from doing unwholesome things. Now if you repeatedly pursue them, you might end up with the worst case scenario. If you are lucky in one sense, then you're reborn as a human, then as a minimum some of these things, they don't sound very good anyway. And so it's meant as an indication for you. And of course there's some complexity to that result, but these are the things that the Buddha warns about. We also went through this Kamma Vibhanga Sutra very briefly in the Dhamma session on the Vibhanga Sutra. This is from Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 135. And the Buddha was asked this question about, why are people born into inferior and superior births as human beings? And they wanted to know what's the cause and condition for that. Why are people having long life, short life? Why are people born sick or healthy? Why are people ugly or beautiful? Why are they uninfluential or influential? Why are some people poor and others born wealthy? Why are some people low-born or high-born? And why are some people stupid or wise? So Buddha answers it by talking about unwholesome actions, so bad actions, and there are about 6 different kinds of actions that he spoke about. And in all cases, he said that the worst case scenario is that if you repeatedly do these things, then you would be born in a bad place, an unhappy destination. So the first one that he talks about is this harming living beings with a fist or a weapon. And he says that if you're reborn as a human being, so it's not the worst case scenario, but say you're reborn as a human being, you'd be born with sickliness. And then when it comes to being angry or bad-tempered, that if you have that kind of behavior, then if you're reborn as a human, then you would be born with ugliness. And then if you were envious and resentful, then you would have no influence if you were reborn as a human, no significance. And then if you're not generous, so you don't make offerings or requisites to ascetics or Brahmins, then you're likely to be reborn with poverty if you're born as a human. And then again, when it comes to if you're obstinate, you're arrogant and conceited, then you'll be reborn as someone of low birth or low class family. And then the final one that he talks about is if you don't visit the noble ones and you don't ask Dhamma questions, then he says that that's the reason if you're reborn as a human, then you would have foolishness or stupidity. So the opposite of it, if you think about what Buddha is saying, is if you cultivate the wholesome side, that you don't harm living beings with a stick or any kind of weapon, then you won't have sickliness. If you're good-tempered and you don't have anger, then you'd be beautiful. And if you are not envious and resentful of others, then you would have more influence in your next human rebirth. And when it comes to offering requisites, that you're generous to ascetics and Brahmins, then you'll be born with wealth. And likewise, if you're not obstinate, you're more humble, you're not conceited, then you would have a high birth, like a high-class family you would be born into. And again, if you visit the noble ones and you ask Dhamma questions, then one would have wisdom and would not be foolish. So these are some of the things that Buddha says. Now, when he talks about it, it is complex, it's not linear. And so when he says it, there is certain calculations and things according to what's in one's personal karmic balance. But on the face of it, you can see that he is telling you where the inclination is. What is the result of that, good or bad inclinations and intentions behind your actions. There's a very useful sutta where the Buddha gives an extended teaching on kamma, and this is known as the Kamma of Bangasutra. It's quite a deep sutta, but in this sutta he's addressing all the different kinds of wrong views or ideas about kamma. And so he ends up explaining about the 4 different kinds of persons in the world. And this really gives us an indication about the complexity of kamma. But we should take it as an encouragement not to get confused or frustrated about it, but to really understand that Buddha is always encouraging us towards training in higher virtue, to make sure that we are leaning towards virtuous conduct so that there is no doubt about where we end up in terms of the results of our conduct. So the first kind of person that he talks about is not virtuous, reappearing in an unhappy destination. So this one is almost like a no-brainer for us. We understand that. So the Buddha says that this person, they actually have unwholesome conduct and they've reappeared in a bad place. So what he explains that as being is earlier you did evil things through body, speech and mind. and later you still continue to do unwholesome things through body, speech and mind. And so at the time of death, you also had the wrong view. And so because of that, you've reappeared in a bad destination, an unhappy place. And if you continue in that in this lifetime, and you continue to cultivate unwholesome behavior by body, speech and mind, then you can expect to experience that in this lifetime, the one after that, or in subsequent existences. So that's the first category. That one we can understand. The second one is you're not virtuous, but you reappear in a happy destination, so a good place. So here you actually still, cultivate the wrong things, but earlier the Buddha says you did good things. And also later on you also did good things, and then when you died you had the right view. And so Buddha says you are reborn in a happy destination, in a good place. But if you continue in this lifetime to cultivate unwholesome behavior through body, speech and mind, then you can expect to experience the result of that in this present life, the next one, or subsequent lifetimes. So there's some complexity there, and you can already see that. So the third one is when you're virtuous and you reappear in a good destination. So Buddha explains this by saying you previously did something good, and later on you also did good actions through body, speech and mind, but at the time of death you also had the right view, and so that's why you end up in a good destination. In this current lifetime, if you continue doing that and you maintain the right view, then you experience the result of that in this life, the next one, or thereafter. So that one we can reasonably understand. It's not surprising. Now when it comes to the last one, that you're virtuous and you are reborn in an unhappy destination, we often scratch our heads about this one as well. So this one, a person is, leading a virtuous life. But what the Buddha says that earlier they did evil things through body, speech and mind, or later they did evil things through body, speech and mind, and at the time of death they acquired or undertook the wrong view. So that's pretty key as well. So when they passed away, they ended up in an unhappy place or a bad destination. But in the current life, if they still continue to be virtuous, then they'll experience the result of that either in this present life, the next one, or in subsequent existences. So clearly there is something in our personal bank accounts when it comes to kamma that can ripen to ensure that we end up in good or bad destinations, and we don't know the weight of these things. Also, Buddha's emphasizing that what we do in our present life has an impact as well. So that's quite an empowering thought. So you can see by going through these 4 kinds of persons that the Buddha is describing through his special knowledge, that there is a certain level of complexity. It's not so simple. And the main takeaway from it is that we need to ensure that we cultivate virtuous conduct by body, speech and mind, and to make sure that we continuously have right view. And part of that right view is around kamma, that we are the owners of our kamma, heirs of our kamma. So it's important that we base ourselves in virtuous conduct and know that there is a consequence for our actions, whether it's bodily, verbal or mental. There are many stories in the suttas about people turning around their lives by coming towards virtuous behavior when they understand about kamma and rebirth. And one of the most powerful ones is always Angulimala, because he was known as the murderer who became an arahant. And what Buddha really emphasizes, and the saying that comes from the Dhammapada, is that one whose evil conduct is replaced by good illumes the world like a moon released from a cloud. So there's always great benefit when you turn around unwholesome conduct to wholesome conduct. And so the story of Angulimala, which most of you may know, is that he was born the son of a head priest in the court of the king. So this was King Kosala. His real name was actually Ahinsaka. So that means non-harm, non-cruelty. So that was his original name. And so when he was of age, he was sent to study in the university town. I think it was a town called Taxila. And he was very intelligent, and he was also very obedient towards the teacher. So he was a very good pupil. And other pupils were actually quite jealous of him because he was well liked by the teacher and the teacher's wife. And so they falsely accused Ahinsaka of having an affair with the teacher's wife. So they went up to the teacher and falsely accused him. And at first the teacher didn't believe him, until after being told a great number of times, he started to believe it. And so he vowed to have revenge against the boy, against Ahimsaka, because he thought, oh, he's having an affair with my wife. He believed those false accusations. So rather than killing him, he came up with a plan to almost like sabotage Ahinsaka, because he didn't want it to reflect badly on him if he were to actually kill Ahinsaka, this teacher. So he told Ahinsaka to go and kill 1,000 men or women, and then he promised to give Ahinsaka almost like priceless knowledge, something that very difficult to attain. And so Ahinsaka was very interested in getting this higher knowledge, but he wasn't very happy to go and kill. But reluctantly he agreed to do so. And so he became known as a murderer because he kept killing and killing and killing. And because he wanted to keep track of how many he was killing to make up the 1,000 kills, he started to thread the finger of every single person that he killed around his neck. And he made a bit of a necklace or a garland. And so he became known as this Angulimala, like a murderer of the land. So when the king heard about it, he wanted to try and capture him. But Angulimala's mother really, really loved him, as you would expect. And so she wanted to save her son. Now at that time, Angulimala had, I think, 999 fingers. So he was just looking for one more. So on that particular day that he was about to set out, and you can imagine Angulimala, after killing so many people and committing such akusala for such a long time, he was very weary and tired. But the Buddha saw that morning that Angulimala was about to make a really, really heinous action. Because his mother was looking for him, his 1,000th kill would have been his mother. And so the Buddha saw that if he were to actually do this, he would go straight to hell and spend eons in the hell realms. So out of compassion, he left the forest and he went looking for Angulimala. And so Angulimala was very tired. He was anxious to make that final kill. And when he looked up, he saw the Buddha and he ran towards him and he was about to kill him. And the Buddha uttered these words. He said, "I have stopped, only you have not stopped." And Angulimala didn't understand those words. And so instead of killing him or trying to kill him, which he probably wouldn't have been able to do, he actually said, "Bhikkhu, why did you say you have stopped and I have not stopped?" And then the Buddha explained that he had virtuous conduct, that the Buddha has stopped killing, he stopped ill-treating other people, he's established himself in metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, that Angulimala, by contrast, has not given up those things and he hasn't established himself in metta and patience and all those good things. And that's why. So when Buddha reflected on those words, and he also reflected on Buddha himself, the aura and the gentleness of the Buddha, he actually thought, these are words of a wise person. This particular bhikkhu is very wise and very brave. So he must be the leader of the bhikkhus. And so when he saw that, and he saw that Buddha actually came with a special light and all those marvelous things, he threw down his weapon and he asked to be admitted into the order of the Sangha. And so Angulimala's mother was still looking for him, and the king tried to find him, and then he heard that he was at the monastery. So when he found Angulimala as a bhikkhu in the monastery, he actually understood that something had changed in Angulimala. And so while Angulimala was in the monastery, he practiced very, very diligently. So he turned it around. He was no longer killing. He took the precepts. In fact, he took the Vinaya, took the rules of the Vinaya. And he, after some time, and it wasn't that long according to the suttas, he attained arahantship, so full liberation, nibbana. And the interesting thing was, even for the rest of his life, he still had to bear with the kamma, the resultant kamma of his previous bad deeds. So even when he went pindapat, when on his alms round, people would throw stones at him and they would hit him, and sometimes they would seriously injure him. But the Buddha would say, although you've done away of evil, you still have to pay for the result of certain past bad deeds. Those deeds that he would have suffered greatly for before, he would have ended up in hell. But these are the resultant now that he's actually changed that. And so that's another way of actually understanding through an example that we still have to bear with. We still have karma that is ripening from our personal sort of karmic bank accounts that we can't understand when or where it will happen. But if the conditions are right, such is the case with Angulimala, although he had become an arahant, he still had to bear with when that karma ripened. And so in his case, it was when people threw stones at him. But apparently, he did pass away quite peacefully, and then he realized parinibbana. So a lot of the monks at the time, and also the lay people, they could not understand that it was possible for someone who had done such bad deeds that they could have realized full liberation, parinibbana. And the Buddha actually said to the monks, you know, he had done such great evil because he didn't have good friends, he didn't have good company. But later, when he had found the good company of the Buddha and the monks, and he was practicing in the Dhamma, then with that help and the good advice of the Buddha and the Sangha, and also of the Dhamma, then he was able to actually overcome all those bad deeds. And so that's very inspirational for us. And there are many other stories like that, even about the Buddha, even about other of the key disciples of the Buddha, where they had to bear with some of their karma ripening. And sometimes they were able to overcome some of these things, and sometimes they just had to bear with. And so Angulimala is a very good story for us to reflect upon when it comes to the complexity, but also when you turn your life around and you really make the foundation for your life to be one of virtue, beginning with right view, non-ill will, non-harm, and then through the good verbal actions, and then of course the good bodily actions as well. Another story we can look at is the story of Devadatta. And so as you know, there are so many stories about Devadatta in the suttas, but let's focus simply on the Kamma side of it. So what's really interesting is King Milinda had lots of questions about Kamma, and he had more of a linear view about Kamma. And so Nagasena, in answering the question, actually corrected his view from the Buddha's understanding of Kamma. So his question was, how was it possible that if Devadatta was such a bad person, that through successive lifetimes he had either an equal birth to the Bodhisattva, or he had a superior to him at times? So the examples that he gave, and he gave numerous examples of how Devadatta and the Bodhisattva were born at the same time, but in different ranks and castes and things like that. So there was times where Devadatta was born as a king, but the Buddha was born as an elephant. There was another time that Devadatta was a farmer, an affluent farmer, and the Buddha was reborn as a monkey at that time. And there were other times where Devadatta was a wanderer in the woods and the Bodhisattva was a bird. And then another time that Devadatta was the king of Benares, or now called Varanasi, but Buddha was an ascetic who was very kind to animals. So there were various different rebirths. And so King Milinda wanted to know, how is all that possible? How did Devadatta get to such a high position or a wholesome rebirth in a good destination? Because what we do know about Devadatta is that throughout every single lifetime, he had hostility towards the Bodhisattva. And as it matured and grew, then he also experienced that in successive lifetimes. And then what Nagasena was also explaining was, when Devadatta was reborn in some of these good places, he was able to do good things. So when he was the king, he was the protector of the people that were poor or needy. At that time, he was building infrastructure like bridges and courts of law and other facilities. He also had the opportunity to practice generosity towards those that he had a preference towards. And because of that wholesome conduct, he also came to prosperity and I guess good results from existence to existence. But finally, when he came to the life, when it was the time of Gautama Buddha and he was reborn as Devadatta, what happened was he plotted to harm the Buddha constantly, and he also created a schism in the Sangha. And so as a result of that, he was immediately swallowed up by the earth and he went straight down to hell. But instead, Gautama Buddha, he was the Tathagata. He realized full liberation and eventually parinibbana. So there are strong parallels in their lifetimes, and you can see that with many of the other chief disciples of the Buddha and other disciples of the Buddha, householders and also those that ordained. You travel in groups through lifetime after lifetime, and you do good and bad things together. And so in the case of Devadatta, it's you can see the complexity, but you can also understand that he didn't always do purely bad. There were certain things where he did good deeds because of his wealth, because of his position, and certain other things. But the main thing that was very clear about Devadatta is that throughout every lifetime, he bore that hostility, that anger, that envy towards Buddha, who was the Bodhisattva in those other lifetimes. And so each and every time, that hostility, that animosity, even any bad acts that he did towards the Buddha, they also matured and ripened, and they also had a bad result. And so in that final lifetime, you see the gravity of such egregious conduct, and also another way of us understanding Kamma. We can end our session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Wishing you well, young friends. Teruan Saranai.